I've kind of, if this were a real class for me and nothing but a class, I'd want a lot of sort of give and take, your comments, my comments. I'd still like some of that today because we can always edit that out if we need to. But again, that really helps me, and that's the way I really like to do things. So if you have a question, raise a hand, make a comment, something like that.
Yeah, Joe is usually more interactive than he's going to be today.
Mm-hmm.
How many of you have had Joe in a class before?
Only a few.
Okay. Well, it's a good thing you came now, John, but if you would come a few minutes later, I
was in the room.
Oh, wait, okay. There's a seat there. Okay. Joe Hatcher, Dartmouth graduate, psychology professor, positive psychology person, happiness coach, long distance runner, buddy of mine. What else? School board member.
School board member.
And whatever else. Anyway, Joe and I were in Jamaica last year, and the class, Maymester class, and a couple of you are going on that this year, right? Hurry up. Fun to see.
At least one.
And that was a peace studies class. And so I learned some things about peace studies. And Joe and I have known for a long time that we have a lot in common. We learned that we have even more in common than we realized.
That's right.
Through that experience. So I'm just going to be running this camera 2 or 3 times during the hour. I'm going to tiptoe over here and play with that camera. Meanwhile, these are just going to run, and then Nick is going to do this camera for a while. So, Joe, if you're ready.
I think I'm ready. Are my levels okay for you?
Your levels are great.
Okay, good. Okay, well, thanks for having me here today. This is a topic that I really like to talk about, peace studies. It relates to all the other things I have interest in, positive psychology, psychology in general, the world at large, education, young people, people my age. And what I want to do is give you an idea of what peace studies is, so you know something about it. It was a new area to me when I first ran into it, and talk a little bit about connections between that and other kinds of things, and some of the things that I've been able to do with this. And to do with students. First of all, though, I want to tell you a little bit of background, because when I talk about peace, when I say I'm a peace studies person, I know from psychology that the usual thing people do is we make personality attributions. We think that tells me something about that guy. He must be a really peaceful person, he must be really gentle, he must be different from maybe the average person. And I want to tell you that's just not true. I grew up the way most people do, very sort of normal kind of life. This is a rural southern life in Georgia. So I grew up hunting and fishing and playing baseball and playing war games in the backyard. We would blow each other up pretty regularly, and I really enjoyed doing stuff like that. I used to read about war and armies and World War II air power. I was going to be a fighter pilot. I was actually appointed to the Air Force Academy, and at a time in my life when I had other offers, I wound up going to Dartmouth College instead. So my background is not really peaceable, not really peaceful. And again, I think that's kind of an important thing to know. I ran into peace studies in the way that a lot of people do. I ran into it sort of accidentally. I was a social psychologist. I was interested in all of social behavior, how people sit, how they look, facial expressions, how you like people, things like that. But one thing that always interested me, perhaps because of my southern background, was racism. Racism, sexism, all the types of prejudice, and these are what we call social justice issues. So they are issues that have values attached to them. They are sort of make the world a better place kind of issues, and that was an interest of mine. But what really got me into peace studies was watching a movie. I watched a movie one night, I've forgotten the name of it. It was one of these World War III movies where everybody gets blown up and you sort of watch people pitifully die off in the end. And that's not quite the way it happened, but it was pretty bad. And I was walking across the campus here the next morning, and I was sort of having those idle thoughts that you have. I was thinking, well, the images of the movie were really in my head. And I was thinking, what would I think if I realized we had gone to nuclear war? What would my last thought be? And sometimes you ask yourself questions like that and you don't get an answer, and it just kind of, but this time I got an answer, and it was like somebody was talking. It was like, why weren't you doing something about that? And I thought, wow, that's a pretty interesting answer, because did I know there was a danger? Could we go to nuclear war today? Could it happen? We all know it's possible. Why was I not doing something about this? And it's a rhetorical question, okay. So The important next part of the story is that having had the thought, thoughts are like seeds. You throw them out, usually they die. This one happened to live because I walked into the East Hall Lounge where all those faculty pictures are, and an old colleague of mine named Robert Melville was in there. And I said to Robert, he had a pretty good sense of humor and was pretty cynical, I said, Robert, what would you recommend if I want to dedicate my life to world peace? And I was kidding, of course. And Robert said, well, you could take my place in the Wisconsin Institute, which is a peace studies organization, which I'd never heard of before, that Robert was a member of, and he was tired of doing the college duties there, so he gave it to me. So I got to know a lot of people and got into the field in that fashion. If Robert hadn't been there that day, chances are I wouldn't be here today talking to you about it. So I got interested in the field. That connected me with other people from all walks of life, from all disciplines, and it's been an ongoing thing for me for the last 15 years. We're having our student conference this next 2 weekends from now, and I don't know whether you heard about it or not, but we often do have students who go and actually present there. So I've been in contact with that. When I first got into it, I didn't know very much about the field. But what I learned about peace studies is that it's an interdisciplinary field that is devoted to the study of war and peace at all levels of human existence. Okay? Interdisciplinary, coming from all points of view, studying factors that lead to war and peace at all levels of human existence. One of the interesting ideas I ran into at the very beginning was the onion approach. I don't have an onion, you're going to have to picture one, okay? Onions, as we know, have different layers. They have an outer layer and they go down to an inner layer. The outer layer for the onion of war and peace is the international. World War III, things like that. As you come down, you get to things like regions, you get to things like countries, neighborhoods, families, couples, and individuals. Now, when I learned that was very interesting to me, because when I first got that idea, why wasn't I doing something about this, what was I thinking about? I was thinking about the outside layer. And if you ask me what I can do to avert nuclear war, what occurs to me immediately? I know I could write a letter. What could I do? It's difficult. Yes, I can write letters. Yes, I can go talk to people. I can try to start movements, but that's kind of hard to do, and it's a little daunting, and it's easy to say, well, I'll just go have a beer instead. Okay, can't do that, let's do this. But when you do the onion thing, what that does is say, well, wait a minute. Maybe I can't do anything at that level. Maybe I can't do anything at this level. Maybe I can't do anything. Maybe at my community level I can do something. Maybe at my family level, if you're a parent, you're automatically doing something. At my couple's level, maybe at my personal level. So maybe at one of those levels I can do peace work. And I found this to be a very helpful view to share to people too, because if I talk to you about nuclear war, it's not really clear what you can do about that. At the same time, let me point out, let's not abandon that level out there too quickly, because it is a really important level. One of the things I've tried to do is try to educate people about those kind of dangers. And you do have a handout in front of you. That handout, if you take a look at it, has a whole bunch of dots on a page. It has one dot in the center. That dot is all the firepower of World War II. If you can picture all the pictures you've ever seen of World War II, including the atomic weapons, that's World War II. All those other dots are just as powerful, and that is the world's nuclear arsenal right about when you were born. So as you see that, you get a sense of how dangerous the world was then, and of course is now, because it's not very different now from the way it was then. When I try to bring psychology into this, one of the things that I like to talk about is habituation. Now remember, peace studies is interdisciplinary. The argument is every discipline has a way to focus on war and peace. And psychology is certainly no exception. I use this in my intro psych course. Those of you who have had me for that class have probably already seen the dots handout. And one thing that I talk about is habituation. My memories of being a child in the 1950s, 1957, There were about 12 nuclear weapons in the entire world at that time, 12 to 20. And in fact, people were pretty freaked out about this. I remember in school having nuclear war drills. We would get underneath our desk, put our hands over our heads, and practice for nuclear war. My prediction would be that nobody in this room has ever done that. Okay. It was probably a useless thing to do in 1957 too. But the point is, in 1957, people were very concerned about this. They were very, very worried about it, and there was a real sense of danger. My own family, which was by no means wealthy, was talking about building a fallout shelter and stocking it and getting ready for World War III. Nowadays, we don't talk about it. Does it mean we're in a safer world now? No, it just means we've gotten used to it. We worry about chemical weapons, biological weapons. We still talk about nuclear weapons, but not even all that much. We even kind of lose track of them occasionally, even within our own country, which has happened once in the last year. So this is something we need to be concerned about. And let me take one more step here to try to point out the urgency of this. I'd like for you to imagine that this is another planet. Not your planet, but some other planet. And you're watching this planet for a long time. And there are beings on this planet, and they're pretty smart. They can build shelters, they can adjust to different kinds of environments and temperatures, but they have this habit of spending a lot of intellectual work on building weapons. And they get better and better and better at it until one day they discover a weapon, they build a weapon that can literally wipe out their species. Okay, you're watching them, and they're pretty smart. What are they going to realize? They're going to realize, we can't build those. We can't build those. Now, look at your dots again, and imagine that they built that many of them. And you say, oops, they're building them. They're building a lot of them. More and more little groups that don't like each other are getting them. What would you predict is going to happen next? It even seems, to me, from that perspective, it seems inevitable. And the odd thing about it is that when it happens, they're going to be surprised. Not you, because you're watching them, but they aren't thinking about it. Whereas from the outside, it looks like that's a real problem. Okay? Now, I tell you that with some hesitation again, because I know that can create a lot of different feelings. It can create a feeling of hopelessness, like, again, the sort of let's go have a beer thing. Might as well, or, well, maybe I should start working on this. And I think if you want to work on that kind of problem, there is no bigger problem that we face. At the same time, you can come inside the onion and you can work at those other levels. You can do all of those at once, of course. Okay, so that's one of the ways that psychology relates to this, is to help people have an emotional response to that, because we don't typically. We just kind of say, oh, well, not a big deal, because we can't really respond to new things very well. When I got into the field of peace studies, I actually learned some things. I learned some fairly simple things that I just never heard of before. So I'm going to pass a couple of them on to you, feeling you probably never heard about them either. One of the things I learned was the difference between positive peace and negative peace. I didn't know there were different kinds. Negative peace is the absence of overt conflict with preparations for overt conflict. If we're talking about two people, I don't like you, you don't like me, I've got rocks stacked up, you've got rocks stacked up, we're kind of, but we're not fighting. And we call that peace. That's negative peace. That's the only kind of peace we've ever known. When I say we, I would say our society. Right this moment, we're at war in Iraq, we're at peace everywhere else, but we have a lot of weapons, everybody else has weapons too, and we sort of don't like each other, and we have different attitudes, so we're really at a state of negative peace. And again, that's what we know. Positive peace is the part I'd never heard of, and I never heard negative peace actually labeled that way. Positive peace is picturing the same thing with all of those resources being directed toward positive things instead of being toward weapons, and the attitudes of not liking each other not being there. Now that is a vision, because that doesn't exist. But to picture that just for a moment, picture whatever we're spending on the military in this country, picture that being spent on other things instead. Now, it's just a vision. I'm not saying we can do that right this minute, but what if we did? Your college educations, how many of you are going into debt? Wouldn't have to. Health systems would be, you could spend money on that. You could. I had a colleague who actually did this as a class exercise, and he found that a class of students really couldn't spend all that money. Even if you bought yourself the fanciest cars and big buildings, you really couldn't spend all that money. Now, that's not to say that it's not reasonable to spend money on defense. It's just saying, if you can imagine in a positive peace world, all that being directed toward other